Hello and welcome back to Talk of the Trinity. I'm your co-host, I'm Will Forrest. Some people call me Mr. Trinity. My missus calls me Oyo. Not everybody can get away with that. With me, I have got the man who is known worldwide as a superstar Villa fan. He's in Guillaume Balaier's Rise of the Villain books. He's changing. He's improving this year. It's not negative, Baz. It's not reasonable, Baz. It's positive, Baz. But Baz, how positive are you about Aston Villa versus Leeds at the weekend? Is it going to be a Villa win, or do we need to delve deeper into just how well Leeds are doing at the moment?
I am actually fairly positive about Leeds, actually. I mean, you got to be positive and ignore kind of our home form recently, which is questionable, and the injuries. And you could say the fact that Leeds have been to Birmingham recently and just about come away with a positive result. But I think in terms of Villa perspective on Saturday, you got to go into these games thinking it's a 3 points, especially if you're up there battling for Champions League or perhaps even more. But no, I am feeling positive. I'm leaning in to the new moniker of Positive Baz for one
I
weekend.
mean, you mentioned Leeds coming into Birmingham last year, and I'm sure they haven't stayed in the Hyatt on Broad Street for the week. I mean, it was a bit of a smash and grab. Let's jump into the Garrison, take all the beer, and leg it home. And it nearly didn't go to plan, but their second team did beat Blues in the cup. However, it's going to be a bit harder for us. They got 8 points out of the last 5 games. We've got 7 points out of our last five in the Premier League. It feels a bit weird actually hearing you say our home form isn't great, especially after the years that we've had of Unai Emery coming in, building this fortress. Yeah, okay, the bricks are starting to crumble a little bit, but with the reinforcements that we brought in, Dougie Louise, Tammy Abraham, the return of Leon Bailey, that's going to be enough, hasn't it, to beat Leeds?
Well, I wouldn't say it's crumbling as such. I'd say more like you just need a lick of paint. Just need to do a bit of maintenance on there. I mean the home form under Emre over the last couple of years has been amongst the best in Europe. So inevitably, when there's a couple of defeats, there is a danger of overreacting. And mentioned we brought in Dougie Louise as a reinforcement, mainly because our first choice midfield is injured. So in terms of just needing to have some people in who know Villa, know the system, know Emre's style of play. So Louise ticked all the boxes in respect to that. And he looks all right, I'd say, in terms of easing his way back in.
I think Dougie's looked fine in the games that he's played. I mean, the one thing I would question though is that Dougie Luiz for me is very similar to Ross Barkley, and he's also quite similar to Yuri Tielemans. I know Tielemans is playing the 10 for the majority of this season because of Kamara and Anana. If Ross Barkley had been fit, do you think he'd have brought Dougie back in still?
I think so with the injuries we've got. I mean, in terms of Kamara, Tielemans, McGinn, all out for a number of weeks, months, rest of the season. In terms of Kamara, I think
Yeah.
it was all hands on deck kind of at that point. And even if it would have been a scenario where Barkley was fully fit and yeah, Louise might not have necessarily gone straight into the team as first choice, you'd want the numbers in, I would have thought. So especially with the financials appearing to make sense from a Villa perspective. Slightly less of a splashy loan signing than the previous January transfer window. But I think, yeah, regardless of the Barkley situation, I think it made sense just from a squad perspective to bring him in. And I think, it's not a deal you can particularly argue with.
I think you're right there. I mean, last year when you look at January and we brought in Asensio, we brought in Rashford, and we obviously also brought in Disasi, who played. a good part when he was at centre back and not such a good part when he was deployed at right back. That was seen as though it was to kick on really and hit those Champions League spots. And we only just missed out on goal difference, didn't we, at the very end of the day? But as opposed to the middle of the day. But at the end of the day, we missed out on that. This year, these signings that we brought in, they're more consolidation, aren't they? Just to get us into a good position to be in the hunt still for the Champions League spaces until Super John McGinn returns in March, until Tielemans returns at the start of April. And Kamara, there's talk about the end of the year for him with his injury.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, I suppose the difference, I'd say January this year and last year, January this year was signings of necessity, really. I mean, in terms of Abraham, I mean, I think most Villa fans are delighted to have him back, but that became a necessity when you're getting rid of Marlon. And Louise was a necessity with the injuries in the midfield, whereas I think Rashford and Asensio last year was the right, we're going to go for the jugular in terms of I mean, we were in the Champions League at the time, so I think that adds another level to the type of player who will want to come to the club and the type of player you think you'll need to sustain a Champions League run. But I think there was an element of right, we're just going to pin everything to the mast here in terms of trying to progress as far as we can and get Champions League back again, which yeah, we all know how that ended, sadly. Which wasn't too far away from the middle of the day. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon from what I can remember by the time we had all hit the proverbial. So I think in terms of the signings have reflected the reduced circumstance or the slightly reduced circumstances. I mean, we're still, playing in European competition, still in the top half of the league. So not as though it was, I always use the example. It's not as though we're losing away at Huddersfield and we're near the bottom of the championship as we and Wigan and kind of no disrespect to those teams, but in terms of that's a completely different time in Villa's generational history. But I think in terms of they've been brought in with us. There's a job to do, and the job to do is to get ourselves over the line for the Champions League spots, which is more similar to two years ago when we were qualified for Champions League for the first time, where we similarly kind of maybe perhaps you could say stumbled over the line in the second half of the season, we got the job done. I think Emre would take the same again.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing with this season as well, it feels like it's a season of two halves in many ways because I think Emery and Alabe are righting the wrongs of the summer transfer window as well, where it feels more and more as though some of the signings that we brought in were quite rushed. Harvey Elliott, the clause that benefits nobody. I mean, Unai Emery is the sort of manager who takes half a season at least to assess a player. So after 10 appearances in the league, he probably would have amassed about 19 minutes of game time. Unai's not going to want to sign him straight from that. And Evan Gassong has left to join Crystal Palace, and he's already setting up goals down there in local derby winners. It just feels as though maybe Dougie and Abraham have come in to steady the ship, not so much just for the Champions League, but also for the fact that our summer transfer window was very much a dustpan at an earthquake site. Dustpan and brush at an earthquake site. It sounded better in my head, I promise. We won't edit that out. But anyway, let's forget about that. We are not on the best form at the moment, I think it's fair to say. We've got a Leeds team coming to town who have done better than expected this season. I think a lot of people probably expected them to be closer to the bottom three than they are. And the signing of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, nearly said Dominic Solanke, the signing of Dominic Calvert-Lewin was a bit of a, right, Leeds, what a great signing. But he's been in fantastic form. Scored quite a few goals for him. Willie Nonto also returning back to the starting lineup, playing well for them, bit of a danger man. How do you see this weekend going in? Is it fair to say that those two are maybe Aronson are the key players for Leeds? Is there anybody in particular who you're thinking, we need to get the shackles on them, and then we might stand a chance of getting a 1-0 win?
But I think in terms of you mentioned Leeds generally this season, and I think in terms of yeah, they're doing all right in the league relatively speaking, and it's mainly because they've hit the cliche that usually gets applied to promoted teams and their best opportunity to stay up is the home form. I mean, in terms of their 12th, well, they're 12th in the table in terms of
Yeah.
home form, but only it would be 22 points, 13 games. But Brentford are in sixth in the form table for home, and everybody's saying what a great job they've done, and they're only on 25 points. So it's not in terms of the home form. I mean, their away form, we should come into the Villa curse probably in a bit. Is shot. They are relegation in terms of away form, 8 points so far. So they've managed. You know that they say the cliche, make your home ground a fortress. I mean, Arsenal didn't find it too tricky when they were there the other week. But you know, in terms of they've got some impressive results at home during the course of the season. I think they beat Chelsea at home earlier on, and you know they're just been kind of picking up. You know, especially when the manager was under a bit of pressure as well earlier on in the season. So I think in terms of key men, he's kind of the manager as well in terms of what he's done. But yeah, you mentioned Calvert-Lewin. He's obviously say their main threat when fit, and it was always when fit was the thing with Calvert-Lewin. I don't think anybody, well, Everton fans may have doubted in terms of his abilities. I remember him getting booed off at Villa Park a few years ago when he'd been clattered and had like a egg kind of on the side of his head, and he still got booed off. Kind of buddy Everton fans. So I think there was no love lost there. But I think in terms of their yeah, I mean, if you're looking in terms of stars, there's not many, but they're a team who are kind of thrown into that underdog spirit and at home fed off the crowd, away not so much. So I think it's uh, apart from the players you mentioned specifically, are there any waking up at night with a cold sweat thinking about? No, not really. But they are more than the sum of their parts, really. I mean, in terms of they're a solid team, know the roles. They kind of the managers obviously galvanized them um, to support his way of playing. They had a very specific tactical one. Tactical might be one way of putting it. Basically, in the summer, if you were tall, then you were getting a chance of moving to Leeds because in terms of they were just basically tall, athletic, big, muscular. That was it. Regardless of whether you played left back, left midfield, centre midfield, up front, basically it was the physical attributes that they've prioritized in the recruitment, especially in the summer. And you know, when you turn it into a battle, it's turned it into a battle, and I think that's what they're going to try and do at Villa Park on Saturday. Just try and turn it into a battle.
If any player looks like a BBC One gladiator, then Leeds are interested in you. I mean, they're a vibrant team, aren't they? They can cause problems on the attack. They're very quick. They brought in a couple of decent players like Justin James, who's done well for them. Perry, the goalkeeper, has had a decent season as well. But one player who I think gets a little bit overlooked at the heart of their defence is Roden, a big, strong, tough tackling player, good on the ball as well. Didn't get the chances that he hoped for at Tottenham Hotspur. But of course, he's going to have nightmares going into Saturday, 3 o'clock at Villa Park. Something that I think some Villa fans might have nightmares about because they can't remember the last time that we were at home at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. It was over a year ago, is the answer
Cool.
to that trivia question.
Yep.
Who's Joe Roden? Joe Roden? Who's Roden going to be having nightmares about, Baz? For me, I think it's time that Tammy Abraham starts, scored that lovely offside goal against Newcastle, scored the goal that got disallowed against Brentford. he only needs one, doesn't he? He needs one, and then we're going to see good old Tammy Abraham from the old Villa days. And when he was in the Premier League at Chelsea, he had a very good season there when they had that transfer embargo. I think it's him leading the line. He's developed so much since he's left the club. Are you in agreement, or do you think that we carry on persevering with Ollie Watkins at the moment?
Well, Abraham he won't get away with having a goal that's offside on the Saturday. You wouldn't have thought. So kind of needs to get off the mark in respect to that. And well, in a tenuous, pointless link, and there's no need apart from just to laugh at people. And that's not big kids, but we're not above it here. You mentioned Rodon in Spurs and having nightmares. Leeds' home record, 22 points. Spurs only have 10 points at home this season, and they're bottom three in terms of the form. Was there any need for that? No. Did I find it funny? Yeah. Well, what I don't find funny is how good Abraham is, because in terms of he's a solid player, but more than a solid player, clearly wants to be at the Villa, and I think, yeah, for him, the way to get him back up to speed is to start him. I mean, he needs to get used to Emre's system. He scored, jokes aside, whether it was offside or not, against Newcastle. Looked lively. And I had a few decent touches against Brentford. I mean, he had another goal disallowed for offside, kind of there.
Yeah.
So attacking the north end, he's kind of certainly some stories for him in terms of being back at Villa Park. But I think the way Leeds are going to play, and whoever they're going to play is going to be just like man mountains, then I think Abraham is the man you want up front in those games. You want to get him on form. You need something to build off. Leeds, you anticipate, are not going to throw men forward, so it's going to be quite a defensive performance from them. And I think Emre does love going through the middle. I think in terms of it, I think Abraham is the man for that particular job. But I suppose in terms of it throws us back to a debate we were having probably 3 or 4 years ago when we had another striker who you had a fondness for at Villa. And the debate was always, do you play them up front together or do you play one up front and Watkins on the left? So in terms of if we both decided that Abraham should be playing up front, you playing Watkins on the left?
I mean, for me, I wouldn't be against the idea. I think if he plays on the left, because we naturally transition into that column through the middle anyway, and Jadon Sancho has been getting a bit more central, then Sancho and Rogers end up behind Tammy and Ollie, and it takes that pressure off Ollie a bit. I mean, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'd be looking at throwing Allison in. I know he's young, he's only just joined, but for him to be brought on for 15 minutes against Brighton when Brighton were on top of us and we needed a goal shows that Emery has some sort of trust in him. I mean, it'll probably end up being Buendia, though, won't it? Let's be completely honest. That's playing
Yeah,
on the left.
I wouldn't
Is
start Allison. Not against Leeds. I think in terms of he needs more cameos off the bench. I think he needs to build up confidence and awareness gradually. I mean, in terms of, I think realistically, if we didn't have the aforementioned list of injuries in midfield, he probably wouldn't even be on the bench. You wouldn't have thought. So, I mean, it's good for his development. We've obviously had to perhaps focus on buying younger players, perhaps a year or two earlier than what we'd like, just to kind of keep the fees relatively reasonable for our financial circumstance and to jump ahead of other teams where, Brazilian players in particular get proverbially jumped on at 16, 17 now for moves to Europe. So you have to be a little more creative, I suppose would be one way of putting it. And hopefully Allison's creative when he gets some minutes on the field. But no, I'd build him up. I'd look to potentially bring him on if we need to stretch Leeds in the second half late on. So not for me, but hopefully in terms of he does get in a position where he's impressing the manager enough in training to warrant a serious consideration for him starting because that shows, he's doing a good job.
Who is it, Watkins or Buendia then?
I mean, in terms of 'cause I suppose speaking of the centre, you're almost building from the centre and going out because I think in terms of you got Abraham, you'd probably play up front. You're gonna have Rodgers probably more in that central role. So then you got okay, who you going either way? I mean, in terms of, I mean, you could even throw a potential curveball and play Bundia and Watkins. I mean, in terms of that'd be narrow. You'd be certainly not
Mhm.
setting yourself up for any width if you're going to do it that way. I mean, yeah, I think I anticipate it is more likely it's going to be Sancho and Bundia, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of a curveball in there. And I know Emre does rate Sancho. He's a little inconsistent. I mean, he's getting up. I mean, I think in terms of to only slightly paraphrase Emre in a recent press conference, he said, "Yeah, Sancho, we liked his effort. He wasn't good enough in the first half. Then he started playing all right, but he needs to play better." I think is basically where Emre comes from. But yeah, I think in terms it might be a Bundia, Sancho, Rogers double act. But
Mhm.
wouldn't be surprised with a curve.
I'd have thought it would be more of those three as well. And Sancho, of course, news about him being leaked today is that whilst he's only started 6 of 20 Premier League games for Villa this season, with those six being more recently, Manchester United have allegedly decided not to renew his contract at the end of the season, so he'll be available on a free. We know that he's on big wages anyway. He's going to have a massive point to prove from now until the end of the season to get somebody to want him, and I'm sure that he will have interest. It depends whether he wants to go back abroad, stay in the Premier League, or stay at the Villa and play for the Villa because he seems happy. But is Jadon Sancho, with that in mind, going to lead the Villa to glory at the weekend? What are we saying the score's going to be, Baz? Are we gonna get a Villa win?
Yes, let's go positive. I'm going to go for it. I mean, one of the things that I mean, we haven't talked about because we're focusing on the attacking players is the defense because it's actually whisper it quietly okay-ish, which is kind of an improvement. I mean, at least we don't have to debate who's in goal, in terms of only got one. But clean sheet against Brighton, clean sheet away at Newcastle in the league. Won't mention the home game in the cup again. I mean, you could say that's not very much, but that's better than perhaps what, especially last season, where I think there were bigger issues defensively, as it were, which might have been why we decided to focus on the attacking end of the pitch, just to try and score more goals.
Can't go
So,
defense. Can't
so,
deflect well in defense.
so I wouldn't underestimate that. So defensively, I'm going to throw in. I think we're going to win 2-0, and I think you will have deduced by that. I think we're going to get a clean sheet.
Fair play. I think it all depends on who's at centre back, and I've done a little bit of my research this week, as you and Dave know from seeing the WhatsApp group, and that's probably why Dave went with a 1-1 draw for this Saturday. But Tyrone Mings, when he's played this season, we've won one game where he's played the whole 90 minutes. And of course, he did score the winning goal in that game. We kept a clean sheet against Brighton. Or did he score the winning goal? Did he get the assist? We struggled at the start of the season with him in concert. How and Mings didn't do great against Brentford either. And then Concer's done well with Pau. He's done well with Lindelof. For me, I'd be hoping that Pau comes back in, though people online don't always agree. Go and check out one of the other videos where I've said who I think the Villa should be looking to sell in the summer. That has raised some debate, let me tell you. Left back for me, nailed on, has to be Ian Martin. Luca Dean, great servant for the club, but Newcastle, I mean, he was very lucky. Before that, he was lucky to play against Newcastle after the way that he let uh, Rayan run past him, walk past him against Bournemouth, and then turn around and blame Emi Martinez for letting the goal in. Um, but I think one key thing for the defence is we need Matty Cash back. I like Lamar Bogard, I really do, but he's a central defensive midfielder. He's not a right back. We need to get reinforcements. But 2-0, do you know what? I'd take 2-0. I think this weekend we're going to see. I think we're going to see us just scrape it. Unfortunately, I'm not as optimistic about a clean sheet, but I'm going to go 2-1. Very similar to the game at Ellen Road where we went 1-0 down and then we fought back. I mean, those two Rodgers goals were beautiful. And if the Villa do what we're both predicting and get those 3 points, it means that we're on the same number of points, same number of games played as Arsenal. After Arsenal's 2-2 draw against Wolves last night, I'm going to pause there so that people can laugh for a few seconds. That's
Could
enough of
happen.
that.
Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch.
Oh, you know, you couldn't. But we played the same number of games. If we win at the weekend, we're 5 points behind Arsenal. Now, Baz, the question has to be, and I'm expecting a very matter of fact answer back from you because of how long I've known you. Are Aston Villa in a title race and can we win the league?
No.
Well, there's
Mathematically,
negative Baz,
yeah, there we go.
everybody.
Well, mathematically, we'd be in a title race, but maths fans will also tell you, and I would be carrying on my positive moniker. If we'd beaten Everton and we'd beaten Brentford, we'd be top by 1 point if we beat
Yeah,
Leeds tomorrow. And I think in terms of the injuries that we've got, I think in terms of, Arsenal giving them the title a few weeks ago, now they're choke jobs, kind of all that. But they've had years of building their squad. And in terms of they got players who can come in when there's injuries and
yeah, they've
they,
got support.
whereas I think if, yeah, if either of those things were true for us in terms of if we didn't have the injuries or we'd won those games, I mean, especially if we didn't have the injuries, then you'd be thinking, everything's aligning, the stars are aligning. Because, in terms of, when Leicester won the league, the stars aligned for them. They managed to keep the same team all season. Other teams in the title race kind of just kept shooting themselves in the proverbial foot, feet, everywhere else. It's just not quite lining up for us in all the ways it needs to, I think, for a title charge. I think in terms of Villa, I think I mentioned previous podcast, the main thing for us is to try and get some momentum before we play Chelsea and to take Chelsea out. And then now we've got Man United away. In the game after that, we'll be coming off a 2 week break after deciding to take the FA Cup off this year. I mean, the ref took the day off, so in terms of that was league. So Chelsea, Man United, they're the big game. I mean, Man United wasn't a big game a month ago because no one thought they'd be doing anything, but they have come back around. So I think they're the big games for us. If we get something out of them, then I think our objective of Champions League. I mean, third, you take highest finish in 30 years. But I suppose I'm going to open the floor to your optimism to lead us home because I mentioned in terms of obviously we both think we're going to beat Leeds. We then got Wolves away on the Friday night, which, as Arsenal found, it is not the easiest game anymore. I've mentioned Villa and Chelsea, Man United and Villa. Get the results there. Where I'm going to lead you in for the optimism is I'm going to read you out the fixtures after.
Okay.
West Ham at home,
Yeah, yeah.
bottom half. They're on a bit of a relegation zone. So they're on a bit of a run
West Ham are
currently.
going to stay up. West Ham are going to stay up.
Then we got Forest away, who are playing their monthly game of, for find the latest manager who the chairman knows.
Where's Wally? Yeah,
Sunderland at home
yeah,
after that. Fulham away.
yeah.
Spurs at home. Burnley away. And then it takes you into the final two games, home Liverpool away, Man City. With your optimistic hat on, does that now fill you with the confidence for you to pin your colours to the mast and go, yes, we are in with a title shot. Arsenal are going to completely implode. Man City are just going to pass themselves to death, so won't remember to put the ball in the net. Is that leaving it for a final day showdown at the Etihad?
Well, you mentioned just a little while ago that the stars have to align, and the last time the stars aligned was a very good time for me because it meant live 25. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that the guns are going to fall silent and the stars are going to align. And as much as I want to be positive, yeah, I think we can. I think we can win the league. I'm not 100% confident. You know, we're relying on everybody else rather than on ourselves. If we had McGinn and Tielemans fit, then I'd definitely feel better about that because McGinn, oh, fantastic this season, especially centre mid when Kamara was out. Kamara's a massive loss. But to be honest with you, at the moment, and I don't know what other Villa fans think, your comments would be appreciated in letting us know. I think finishing fifth at the moment would be a good season for us. It would be disappointing, but it would be a good season considering the slow start. What happened at January with having to rebuild the squad again because of injuries and because of the summer, and also it's Champions League football. And at the end of the day, if we can qualify for Champions League football through the league, we will make more money doing that than finishing sixth and winning the Europa, winning the FA Cup and the Europa. You know, the money is, and it's heartbreaking in many ways. The money nowadays is finishing in the Champions League spaces because you're looking at 150 million, aren't you, revenue there? But it's what Unai set out to achieve. Though I do feel that it would be, I, yeah. Do you know what? I'm going to do. Yeah, I'm going around the houses and back to the start. But I think we're still in with it, and I think that we'll be in with a chance of getting of winning the league up until about 4 or 5 games left, and then I think it'll really. Uh, then I don't think we will. Could we finish second? I think they'll pull away from us as well, but I'm confident that we will finish at least third this season in the league.
Well, I'll throw one out for you then. In terms of we're moving our optimism down a peg a bit, and you mentioned in terms of Champions League is the priority because the money are qualifying for Champions League. Of course, fifth, as you mentioned, will get us in the Champions League. In mathematics, linguistics, gymnastics, plastics, anything else you can think of permitting. But winning the Europa League will get you Champions League as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I know the answer to this. Would you take fifth and get knocked out in the chat in the Europa League quarters, or would you take sixth and seventh but win the Europa League?
I, it sounds really bad to say that I don't know. I mean, because of the money and the revenue side of things, obviously finishing in that fifth, that top five is worth more money. It's worth about 10 million more or whatnot. And you you think that we'd be able to keep hold of our elite players. However, I've said a few times recently on the podcast that it would be so nice to win something and to have generation of Villa fans who have never seen us win anything actually have that euphoria. I remember how I felt when I was 9 at Wembley and Ian Taylor scored and Sabo and Dwight York and they paraded the League Cup around afterwards and you just it's a day to remember and it's memories that'll last a lifetime. So I think the unselfish side of me would be, do you know what? If we win the Europa League, I would take sixth or seventh. I think everybody would be a bit disappointed, but I think they'd be optimistic that we'd be able to build on it next year, and it would be harder being in the Champions League because of the quality of teams. But we saw last year that actually the quality of the Champions League isn't amazing, really, anymore. But do you know what? Maybe that's a conversation for next time. We'll ask Dave as well what he's thinking. But we won't get ahead of ourselves. We won't get the banners in on order just yet. We won't go to Moonpig for the card for Mr. Emery, and we'll just hold off on putting the deposit down on the gold statue. First of all, we need to get down to Villa Park. And whether you are sat in the Trinity Road, the whole end, whether you're just going to be in the Witten Arms for the whole game, or you're going to be sat on your sofa listening on the radio, very much all the places that you can listen to our podcast or watch our podcast, because we're on YouTube at Talk of the Trinity 1874. It's the same for Instagram. We're on Threads. And we're on X at Talk Trinity, and we're also on TikTok now. You can see Dave Martin's dances. Doesn't know they're being recorded. Don't tell. But get down there, make the atmosphere nice and loud, and let's roar those Villa boys on to a win over Leeds United at the weekend. And then we can whisper it loudly. We're gonna win the league. Cheers, Tar. Thank you very much. Up the league winning Villa.